Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Nightlight. So glad you were sharing your evening with us. Couldn't be more delighted, actually, because we've got a great guest tonight. Before we get into that, though, I do want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. You can find him if you Google Native Storytellers. He and his wife are professional storytellers and have been carrying on that tradition for decades and decades and decades. And if you've never experienced any of the Native myths told by a storyteller, you've missed something special. So Google him, check it out. It's an adventure in itself and far better than textbooks for sure. Tonight we're going to be looking into a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and it's a book called Precognitive Dreamwork and the Long Self, written by Wargo. It's an amazingly insightful book, and it does help us to see another level of what we flip off as it was just a dream. Well, no, it's not. This book outlines a set of clear principles to help guide dream workers, and he's illustrated it through real precognitive dream experiences. He shows how to detect precognitive dreams through their characteristic features, explaining how dreams relate to memory and why dreams about future experiences are often symbolic or distorted. And he explores the mind-blowing implications of precognition of our lives, including how our present thoughts actually shape or shaped our past. Once only the stuff of science fiction, evidence has grown that precognition, that's glimpses of our future in dreams and visions and being influenced subtly in our waking life by what has come, is real. Your future thoughts and feelings shape who you are now, and your present thoughts and feelings shape or shaped your past. Eric shows how dream workers can play the role of citizen scientists, adding to our understanding of this fascinating, almost unexplained dimension of human life. Drawing on psychoanalysis and contemporary sleep science, he explores how precognition relates to memory, explaining why dreams of future experiences are often distorted and what those distortions probably mean. He discusses never-before-described dream features, including time gimmicks, that's symbols hinting at time distortion, and calendrical resonance, the tendency of dreams to foretell experiences exactly a year or years later. He describes why an understanding of precognitive augments Jung's theory of synchronicity by highlighting our own role in producing meaningful coincidences in our waking lives, and he also shows how precognition manifests in other states of consciousness like lucid dreams, out-of-body experience, trance states, sleep paralysis, and meditation. He has a PhD in anthropology from Emory University and works as a science writer and editor in Washington, D.C., and in his spare time, he writes about science fiction, consciousness, and the paranormal at his popular blog, The Night Shirt, So it is with great pleasure that Nightlight welcomes Nightshirt to the show. Welcome, Eric. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me on.
It's, your book I found fascinating because, like just about everybody, we look at dreams and we think, oh, if that were only true, and we kind of fluff them off as it's just our imagination. And I'm really glad you wrote the book because it does help people to understand that this is not just fluff. Our dreams are trying to tell us something, and it's sort of like you've termed the you've sort of termed the long self into other. You've turned what I call higher consciousness or the spirit within into long consciousness. So I kind of am curious how you came to renaming that aspect of our consciousness to the long self, and how come it's called the long self?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I've been working with precognitive dreams for several years and sort of grappling with the implications of dream precognition, which I assume we'll get to later in the show, sort of defining what that is and and so on. But what it awakens to you, and when you realize how it's working, okay, that this is not, you're not receiving information from some divine source or from some, if you're not getting information from outside of you, what you're getting information from is from your future. And when you realize that your future exists, you have a future, that you extend through time, years, decades, ahead in time. That is a real paradigm shift for understanding one's self, And it, it's not surprising that we have a past, right? I mean, we have a past that extends back to our birth, if not before. I don't even delve into the metaphysical, possible metaphysical possibilities. But, at least in terms of our physical existence here on Earth, we have a life and a biography. And that's not surprising. But something, in our culture gets us to forget that and gets us to think of the past as dead and gone and irrelevant, and to think of the future as, well, how could the future possibly be relevant to who I am now or to what I'm doing now? There's, you'll see a million versions of that quote that, the past is gone, the future doesn't exist, and all there is right now. Well, the opposite of a great truth is another great truth, and that's that our past still exists and our future already exists. And that's what precognitive dreamwork really awakens you to. And so it got me to start thinking of the self not as a collection of qualities, personality and so on, in the way that I think people tend to think of it, but to think of the self as something that extends through time, that is long, that is unfolding, over decades, and that is, it's not just going in a single direction. What precognitive dreamwork reveals is that things that you did when you were a kid or when you were young were actually kind of shaped or bent a little bit by things that were going to happen later in your life. And, that's a real major paradigm shift for understanding who we are, I think. And so the long self comes from that paradigm shift, I think. And there's,
Gotcha.
There's precedent for it in Eastern thought. There's the long body, I'm not sure what tradition that is, but the idea that we extend through time, I think it has, I think it's described a little bit better, I think, in some Eastern traditions.
Yeah, I'm going to have to step out of my metaphysical closet here and step into a more scientifically oriented closet, because of course, I'm metaphysical to the eyeballs. However, I do believe that your material does apply and play into a lot of the philosophies that I hold to. For instance, I firmly believe that a child, before they're 4 years old, if you look at the things they're interested in and that they show capacity for, if you pay attention and you help them to explore those areas, that those are areas that would probably more greatly benefit them in the future of this lifetime if you help them to sort of generate more interest in them. I used to play teacher when I was a child. I became a teacher. I used to have funerals for pets or dolls, whatever needed to be buried. And I became a minister, and I loved painting the paper doilies that you get under pastries, and I eventually created a deck of cards that were hand-painted mandalas. So I do believe that there are hints in childhood that can help you have a richer adulthood if they are worked with, and or if a person at this point in time goes back and checks them out and decides to maybe explore some of them. So that I think that in some ways our mind does hold where we have greater talent, and it's a matter of being able to tap into where that material is stored and then generating it into adulthood so that it can manifest more fully for you as you get older.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Where I think it goes beyond that, though. I mean, I think that it's not just these sort of potentials that are like latent in us, but I think that I've really come to believe quite strongly that our future experiences, our future life experiences, and our future, conscious thoughts and feelings and things are actually already in our heads, in a very kind of symbolic, indirect, unfocused fashion when we're younger. It's not just some sort of potential that we have, but it's our actual future is already there, sort of drawing us towards it. So yeah.
Well, but it takes, though, being sensitive to that material is there. It takes some sort of a sensitivity to be able to recognize that there is something that's pulling at you, and quite obviously it happens subtly in dream work or daydream work or or meditation or any way that you get into that kind of receptivity state within your reality to pick up the hints at this, and then it behooves you to follow through on those hints if you can interpret them.
Yeah.
So you recommend, and you recommend something that I recommend as well, that people keep a dream journal. And I mean, I can't say. I mean, your book is constantly saying, write your dreams down, and it makes great sense, and it is a way of getting information from that part of you that is under many, many, many layers of even if you want to go into, alpha, beta, theta states. It's there. It's a matter of allowing yourself to be in that state to retrieve that information. And Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, absolutely. It's crucial to write down your dreams, and it's kind of sad that people have lost that mentality. Back a century ago, everyone was paying attention to their dreams. The influence of Sigmund Freud and his psychoanalytic school, and then shortly thereafter, the Jungian tradition that sort of branched off of Freud's movement and other sort of parallel movements that kind of emerged. Everyone was paying attention to their dreams. The surrealists, were paying attention to their dreams. It was, the dream world was however you interpreted it or however you understood what dreaming was. Everyone agreed that dreams were important. And so if you were a thoughtful, seeking person, artistic, creative, whatever, intuitive, there was just, you wrote your dreams down and you interpreted them and you talked about them with friends and you spent a lot of time on your dream life. You engaged in kind of what I sometimes call dream hygiene, and we've lost that. And it's really sad. It's quite sad, even among, the kinds of people that I sort of hang out with, at least online, metaphysical type, new agers and parapsychologists and people interested in the paranormal. Very few of them really pay much attention to dreams, and very few people actually keep a dream journal. And boy, we've got to get back to that. We've really cut off a huge part of ourselves.
Well,
I think it partly has,
No, you're absolutely right. But it's not a huge but it's a little but. Since I read your book, I've been really working at making sure that I wrote down bits and pieces that I remember when I wake up. But oh my gosh, you've got to grab it fast. I mean, if you decide I'll go to the bathroom and then I'll write it down, it's gone. And and it's just then it's a matter of, okay, how much of it can I remember? And you get pieces of it. So it is a talent and a skill that you need to work on. It's not something that happens overnight. But how do you tell the difference between a waking dream, because the waking dreams and the go to sleep dreams are the ones that we are most likely to remember. How do you tell the difference between a daydream and a waking dream, and how do you determine what is your imagination what is imaginative? In other words, what kind of a scenario are you trying to weave into your reality before you actually get out of bed, and what was actually a dream that had messages in it for you? How do you tell the difference between the two?
Well, I think what you're sort of referring to is really more what's often called the hypnopompic state. That's that state that you're in when you're hitting the snooze button in the morning and you kind of drift in and out of consciousness, and it's a bit dreamlike, it's very rich, but you may be kind of very actively thinking, going through some preoccupation or problem or whatever, and so it seems kind of like, well, how, is this me just being, daydreaming, like you say, or whatever. The key is learning to recognize thoughts that don't feel like you thought them. Recognize images that with just a second of hindsight go, oh, that was really weird, and that was dreamlike in the sense that that came to me. That was not me actively creating a scenario in my head. I mean, when we're fully awake and we imagine something, mentally rehearsing, giving a lecture tomorrow, like I can rehearse it in my head in order to feel more secure about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to look, doing it. But that's me, that's me creating a little mental diorama, and moving myself like an action figure in that diorama. I'm deliberately shaping that scenario. But a dream or a hypnopompic image or a scene or a hypnagogic scene, that's hypnagogia as you're falling asleep, those really are spontaneous. You're not actively creating that. Now we can talk, there are sort of in-between states like lucid dreams. We can talk about that, but even there, the bulk of it, even if you're able to sort of exert a certain amount of control and direct your actions, nevertheless, it's sort of has spontaneously arisen. It's not something you are deliberately creating, and learning to tell the difference between deliberate directed thought and a dream or a dreamlike image is really that's crucial for working in those in-between states as you're falling asleep or as you're waking up. Learning to recognize the difference between your own directed thought, directed imagination, and just what sort of spontaneously arises. Training in meditation really helps, because if you have training in meditation, you know how to sort of get a little bit of distance on your thought stream, right? And to sort of watch passively thoughts arise. And the more training, more experience you have doing that, the easier it is to kind of recognize in the moment, oh, wow, this is a hypnagogic image. This is, because in the moment when you're doing it, it just feels very rational and normal. This is a normal train of thought. And then, but you have that little pause, get that little separation between you and the thought to realize, oh, wow, that was just really bizarre. That was totally irrational. And that's the hallmark of dream. And yeah, those kinds of images, those kinds of non-directed thoughts, images, monologue, often, that can happen in waking life. That can happen, it happens in meditation very often. Some people, I think some sort of segment of the population, people who make good psychics, basically, are able to kind of access that much more readily in waking life. And I know a lot of people like that who readily, an image will arise, or they'll have a vision, a waking vision. So yes, that state is very, very precognitive, the same way as dreams. I focus on dreams in the book because that's what most people find easiest. Most people, even if you've never had a vision or never had never even been aware of, hypnagogia or hypnopompic states, most people, they know what you're talking about when you're talking about a dream, and all you have to do is just write down what you remember of your dreams when you wake up, and you're doing it. You're doing dream work of one sort or another when you do that. So since it's sort of the most, for beginners at accessing their precognitive side, basic night dreams, your vanilla night dreams, those are the easiest to work with. So yeah, that's why I focus on those. But yeah, there is a whole spectrum.
Now, I think one of the main things that came up out of reading your book was that the dreams, almost all of them have a precognitive aspect to them, but very few dreams are literal. Usually there's interpretation that has to come in here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the pieces of thing that I'm trying to do in this book. You'll read books about ESP and about psychic dreams and precognitive dreams, and there are a number of preconceptions that you're going to get from those books. A, that they're literal, and there's certainly examples of those, but they're way in the minority. Another preconception that you're going to get from those books that goes along with that literal that idea that they're literal, is that they are mainly about big events like deaths and disasters and tragedies of one sort or another. Absolutely not. I mean, the vast majority of precognitive dreams are really about relatively mundane upheavals ahead. And, by upheaval, I mean something like, the sink backing up, or, some embarrassing situation at work, or something like, they're on that level. Because our lives, generally most of our lives are pretty boring, which is a good thing. We're not in the trenches. We're not living the life of a James Bond. We're not. Our lives are not that intense, and there's not that much at stake in most of the things that happen to us most days. Now that's not to say that big events don't happen. I mean, and certainly those do, stand out in the landscape of precognitive dreaming. But most dreams are about mundane events. They're not literal, sort of video, what I call video quality representations of what's going to happen. Although that those kinds of dreams do happen, and some people are very prone to them. But usually they're at least distorted enough that it's not going to be obvious. The connection is not going to be obvious unless you reflect on it afterwards. Or they're totally symbolic, and you need to do some free association to realize the connection. So those are two of the three big myths. I'd say the third big myth that also goes along with those two is that precognitive dreams somehow feel different from other dreams, that they're numinous. You'll see that word numinous always thrown around in connection to precognitive dreams. And that's not at all the case. Some dreams feel like, wow, that's going to, that was a premonition somehow. And it may turn out to be. But in fact, your most mundane, boring seeming, trivial, or stupid seeming dreams can be just as precognitive as those so-called numinous ones. And that's why I say you've got to record all of them in as much detail as you can, because you will find amazing connections to the most boring seeming dream. And in fact, those boring seeming dreams, are more likely, you're almost more likely to get a connection to those because they may connect to something that's going to happen that day or the next day. And you'll be really rewarded by having that written dream that then, boom, it's so obviously about some experience, that happened at work, 2 days later, or something your kids said, something, totally random that your kids did or said. It's those little, I almost find that those little seemingly nothing innocuous dreams are often even more interesting sometimes. So yeah, it goes back to the basic precept, I guess, of my teaching, which is that you have to record all your dreams.
Well, I think the one precognitive dream that I remember, Jean Dixon was a very famous psychic, and she had a recurring dream of the White House with a dark cloud over it draped in black, and she kept trying to contact President Kennedy with that information, and she was never able to get through. But they have it, it's recorded. They did had proof that she had tried to get through with that information. So, but and every now and then, but knowing you have this capacity, what does that do to your life? I mean, how do we use it? Okay, so I'm able to grab. And every now and then I have been able to grab a dream, and it was, it felt like there was more information in there than I actually could conceive of initially. And so, when I tell people to write their dreams down, I say leave a blank page after every dream so that you can come back to it, look at it, and reevaluate if something happened that was close to this, then write it down and see if it doesn't help to beef out exactly what was what you were trying to tell you. I mean, if this is indeed a way of talking to your longer self, that has a greater capacity to help you make your life richer, then, how do we use our dreams to make life richer? I mean, and I'm not talking money, I'm talking understanding and understanding the journey we're on each lifetime.
Yeah, well, the first phase is just you need to convince yourself of the reality of this. It's not enough to read about it. It's not enough to read, some famous person's premonition that came true. That unfortunately, that's what people are left with by typical ESP books. They'll have some pretty amazing cases from some famous person who had a premonition. For instance, Jane Dixon's, premonitions of JFK's assassination, things like that. It's like, okay, wow, that's pretty cool, but it doesn't. It doesn't. It leaves you with the idea. Well, psychics can maybe do this, and again, it only happens around big disasters like 9/11 or a presidential assassination or something like that. No, I mean, you need to do this work and show yourself that, in fact, you are doing this all the time in your dreams. I mean, the reason we're not aware of it is that nobody, even people who write down their dreams, which, again, very few people do anymore, even people who do that don't go back to their dream records, after a short period of time, like what you're saying. That is the key. That's what makes dream work precognitive dream work. Going back to your records, the recommendation, here's the recommendation. I'll give your listeners the basic methodology of precognitive dream work is, one, write your dreams down in as much detail as you can remember. Two, and here's a step we haven't talked about, but it's very important, free associate on your dream. That's where that page that you're talking about, leaving an extra page, comes in. But I say you do it right away. Write your dream down, and if you have time, or at least sometime that day, just reflect on what's the first thing that comes to mind from the dream as a whole, and also from specific elements or symbols in the dream. A particular person, appears in your dream, and you haven't thought about that person in years. What's the first thing that comes to mind about that person? Or what's the first thing that this object in the dream, or a place in the dream? What's the first thing that comes to mind? It may be something completely random, unrelated seemingly to the dream, but write those associations down. Because you'll find often that it's that association that is the connection to the later event. But then step 3, at the end of every day, you write your dreams down, free associate if you can, and then just set them aside. Don't even think about your dreams during the day. But then go back to them at night. At the end of the day, just look at your dream records from that day and also the previous, I'd say, 2 days. So basically look at your last 3 nights of dreams every time you go to bed. And that's when you sort of reflect on, reflect on what's happened during the day, over those last few days, and reflect on any similarities between waking experiences and the explicit dreams you wrote down, and also with the associations that you wrote down about those dreams. Because that's where you're going to then start detecting that, oh wow, that dream was, wow, that was about this, that weird little random thing that happened yesterday, and often it's not the most important thing that happened in your day, but it's nevertheless, it stands out in your memory, and it's like, oh wow, that's really cool. And so the more you notice this happening, the more you can, I put a little star in every dream that has seems to have a precognitive referent in something that happened, within the next few days, or maybe a week or 2 weeks, whatever, and the more you get a dream journal that's full of those stars, and wow, you start having this experience, because every precognitive dream is mind-blowing. It's like it's one thing to read about it. It's another thing to experience it in your own life. Like, oh my God, I dreamed about this totally unpredictable, random experience that happened later, and that goes against everything we have been taught since childhood about causality and about how the world works. It goes against everything, and it's mind blowing. The trouble is, when you have an experience like that, and this is true of any paranormal experience, when you have it once, you're liable to go, it's like, mind-bending at first and paradigm-altering, but then after, give it a couple of days and it's like doubt creeps in, and you start doubting yourself and like, oh, maybe that didn't happen, or maybe I'm just deceiving myself, or whatever. It's very easy to just kind of let doubt kind of wash away a single one-off paranormal experience. But when you start experiencing that and having these hits, once a week, multiple times a week, it over time it wears away the doubt, and then you're in a new place. Then you're in a new place in terms of how you understand the world, how you understand psychology as it's been taught, how you understand causality, how you understand a lot of things. That is a real rupture from who you were in the past to who you are now. That's a kind of an initiation. I call it a gnosis. It really is a kind of gnosis. And see, the point, as you said, this isn't about getting rich in the lottery. I mean, it's very, very rare, although it's not unheard of. I don't want to say that it won't happen, but it's very rare to dream of winning lottery numbers or dream of something that you can readily act on and take it to the bank. But there are counterexamples. I can even talk about some really cool examples of people who did make a lot of money with their precognitive dreams. But by and large, that's not what this is going to allow you to do. What it's going to do is bring you to that point where, wow, reality is not what you thought it was. Time is not what you thought it was. And your consciousness, you are not who you thought you were. And you start to realize that you are a long self. Okay? And that's an initiation right there. And that opens the door then to rethinking your whole life, re-examining your whole life from the standpoint of, well, if the future is influencing me, if only at night during my dreams, but possibly even in waking life, if the future is influencing me now, that means that me now, having some experience, sort of standout experience in my day, that is somehow influencing my past. That influenced my past. And when you start to think about that and start to think about these subterranean connections, I sort of think of one's life as a landscape, and you walk from one end of the landscape to the other. You start to realize that there's this whole subterranean cave system in that landscape that you've never, you're just maybe frightened by, or you've been ignoring these caves and grottos in the landscape. But in fact, those are like those grottos or those caves are connections, subterranean connections to other points in your life, literally. That's mind blowing, and I give some, I have some examples in the book of powerful precognitive dream experiences that spanned decades in people's lives and were really decisive in shaping a person's younger self and a person's life trajectory because of some powerful experience happening later in their life. And inevitably, the younger self inevitably misunderstands the messages that come from the future. I think there are reasons, there are important reasons why that's always going to be the case. But nevertheless, understanding how we were shaped in our lives by our later lives, in hindsight, is just utterly mind-blowing. And
well,
it raises the level of the value of our lives, I think, by a factor of, 10. It just makes our lives so much more valuable and interesting and wonderful,
Well, who then programs the future that is precognitively giving us hints? And I know you're going to say us, but at what point in time have we written the stuff that we are picking up precognitively?
At no one point in time. That's the point. That's the thing. We're writing it our whole lives. We're writing our future. In the normal forward in time linear sense. Writing our futures in our past. That's no one has any problem with that idea. But the thing is, our older selves are also co-writing our younger selves. It's a collaborative project. Essentially we are writing our biographies, but it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration between our among our myriad aspects of ourselves that they unfold across the span of life. So it's really it's a collaborative work. It's a collaborative work by yourself. Yourself is a collaboration.
So that does not take away the element of free will, because if we're doing the writing, then we have the free will to write. Okay, so that being the case, we have different levels of consciousness. So it would be that higher level, the long self, that is writing, doing the co-authoring for the consciousness. Or is it? To me, it's like if my consciousness was actually programming what's going to come, I would roll my sleeves up. But I don't think it's my consciousness, because I don't think I know enough about what I need to know for what's coming. But the long self would have a better idea as to what area of development I need to be involved in or whatever.
Well, so your later life self. Let's put it that way. I don't think there is some other consciousness sort of hovering above me right now. That's not what the long self is. The long self is this long succession of conscious thinking and reflecting and acting over the course of life. And when we're young, it's pretty naive and pretty crude. And as we get older and more wise and know more, it can be incredibly smart. And but we also lose things in the process too, right? I mean, so there's I think that's what I mean by a collaboration. I think the long self is not a single higher entity hovering above me somehow. It's simply the whole of my four-dimensional reality, and the sort of interaction, that kind of interaction between a more conscious self that's kind of in the later years of that progression. I think we generally kind of become more conscious over the course of life. Maybe there's kind of ups and downs there, but I think there's a general trend towards increased consciousness as we become wiser and older. And so that, if I'm going to talk about a higher consciousness, I'm going to talk about that more that consciousness looking back, that kind of reflective hindsight consciousness that knows just a little bit more than the younger self did, or knows a lot more than the younger self did. And particularly if we're putting effort into understanding our lives, for instance, through precognitive dreamwork and life work, then that's elevating that consciousness of the latter portion of our life that much more. But it's never fully conscious. That's one thing about precognition. It's not about consciousness. It's an unconscious factor. I mean, even someone who is a developed, trained, skilled precog, someone who's really, in tune with their precognitive nature, nevertheless, their precognition, nevertheless, is always operating through the avenues that Freud called the unconscious. That is through dreams, and that is through our symptoms, and through our feelings, and through things that are kind of outside the realm of our conscious, deliberate thought. So it's always a kind of unconscious.
Okay, I'm more comfortable
factor.
with that because the unconscious mind has access to, I think, greater wisdom that has been experienced and sort of logged in that in a conscious state we might not draw upon. So
well, the way
that
Well, I hear what you're saying, and here's how I would, based on my experience with this, how I would reframe that, is that the wisdom really comes from us, our conscious, awareness and our conscious understanding at various points in our life. But it's the unconscious that is able to share, that is able to take that information from the future and carry it into the past, and vice versa, carry it from the past to the future. The unconscious is kind of the river or the currents that or like I said, that underground cave system that sort of enables wisdom from our future to reach into the past and guide us. So it's kind of the mechanism, for self-communication across time. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but that's how I kind of would reframe that.
Oh yeah,
sort of understanding.
No, we're just talking semantics. Remember, I come from metaphysics, and I'm trying to fit into scientific here. So it's not impossible. It's a great challenge, and I welcome it. So you have precognition, and then you have prophecy. What's the difference?
Precognition is an umbrella term, which encompasses the other terms you'll often see are prophecy, which it means literally saying before, and it's kind of typically associated with religious contexts and literary contexts. So a prophet being someone who spoke, uttered, something that was to come, or a writer who had a, prophetic, text or whatever. The other terms you'll sometimes see are premonition. Premonition means, it sort of connotes warnings. And so it tends to be used in the context of bad things. We say we have a premonition of someone, the death of a loved one, or a premonition of a plane crash, or a premonition of 9/11, or something like that. And another term that's being used more and more, particularly in parapsychology, is presentiment. And that is feeling the future. And that sort of connotes this idea of outside conscious awareness, nevertheless being sort of influenced in some way by something in the future. And it's an area that parapsychologists have actually studied a lot over the past 2.5 decades. It's really the most interesting. I think some of the most interesting parapsychology research is in the field of presentiment research. That is people studying how your autonomic responses or your brainwave patterns, or your skin conductance, or your heart rate, and things like that can be influenced by a stimulus that's coming down the pike, in a few seconds or whatever. There's a lot of really good research demonstrating this in the laboratory. And again, that's presentiment. So it's not knowing the future, but feeling the future. So I use precognition as just an umbrella term that encompasses all of that. The point is, any kind of being influenced by the future, or knowing or seeing or feeling future events that's not through a process of deliberate inference. It's not prediction. Standard prediction is different. Precognition encompasses, somehow being influenced by something that you just can't predict that lies ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, it does explain why modern-day science is having trouble even explaining how it exists. There's so much that is left to interpretation that, scientific facts are kind of carved in stone. So...
Well, they shouldn't be. That's the thing. They're not supposed to be. Scientific facts are supposed to be, subject to constant, revision and questioning. And unfortunately, we're kind of in a phase of science that's kind of hardened. It's kind of gotten ossified. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think we're in a phase of science that's kind of awaiting a big paradigm shift, and unfortunately, there's a lot of resistance before a paradigm shift. There's a lot of people digging in their heels, because they've got a lot vested in the current paradigm. Careers, funding, and so on. Is vested in the existing paradigm, and but I think it's going to. I do think it's going to shift, if not all at once, in what Thomas Kuhn called a scientific revolution. It'll sort of shift gradually, across different fields, sort of in a staggered way. And I think it's going to have to come ultimately from physics, because everyone looks toward physics as kind of the arbiter of science. Somehow, physicists are somehow seen as higher than all the rest of us scientists.
Yeah.
And so I think, but the reason I think it is going to happen is because more and more people in physics are talking about retrocausation. That is to say, the idea that in fact causes don't just go in one direction. The reason science has been so resistant to anything like precognition for so long is because, back in the days of Isaac Newton and his friends, any cause that went in reverse was considered teleology. Okay, that was and that was at that time assumed to be a function of divine intervention or miracles. Okay, and to do science, you had to leave God out of it. Okay, and so it was just no fair talking about anything smacking of divine intervention. And so that's the reason we had these rigorous rules about what was an acceptable scientific explanation, and that they could only accommodate causes going in a single direction. And to be fair, that does account for 95% of human experience. We live in a world that's dominated by entropy, and it makes the laws of thermodynamics and all the physical laws formulated in the Enlightenment or in the centuries after it. They worked very well for predicting things that we needed to predict, and to make machines and so on, and to get us to this point in our technical development. But, they left a certain amount of human experience unaccounted for. And psychologists have, tied themselves in knots, trying to fit human experience within this kind of mechanistic framework inherited from the Enlightenment. And and the thing is, now physicists are realizing that actually on the smallest scales in nature, causation doesn't go just one direction. And and now the emerging field of quantum computing, which I think that's really where a lot of this change is going to come from. Quantum computing is where you scale up those tiniest scales in nature and make something usable out of quantum spooky behavior. And that's what a quantum computer is. And what they're showing in quantum computing, I mean, literally, every month there's a new article about this. You could reverse the causal order of a computation in a quantum computer, which essentially means, producing an output before an input, And so you're essentially talking about something like precognition in a computer circuit. Well, I think once the implications of that are kind of fully realized, then it's only then a matter of time before that sort of filters down into the other sciences, because already, for a couple of decades we've had a thing called quantum biology, which is, looking for how living systems scale up spooky behavior of the quantum realm. And it's already well known that a lot of physical processes in cells and in living systems are quantum in nature. They're essentially quantum computers. Well, if quantum computers allow retrocausation, and if cells are doing this too, well, then it's a short leap from there to understanding that, well, maybe the brain is a kind of quantum computer, and if the quantum computers that are being built in laboratories can reverse causal order, well, then maybe the brain's doing the same thing. I mean, that's really where what I think is going to be the discovery. Hopefully within my lifetime. I'm not holding my breath right now, but I think that it's going to happen. Within a couple decades, probably.
Well, they say we only use about 6% of our brains, and it doesn't make any sense. That's not empty space there. It's got to be used for something, and it's. I often describe our physical bodies as I use the analogy of a car, and a car that had all the bells and whistles that could possibly be crammed into a car, but we don't have the owner's manual, so we have all these bells and whistles inside of ourselves that we can utilize. We just have to figure out how to utilize them.
Yeah. That's really that's really what it is. We've got these amazing capacities, and the thing is, we are using them. That's the thing. Evolution didn't just sort of give us this neat feature and then just forget to give us a user manual. We're using it all the time. That's what intuition is. We're using this precognitive ability, and I think that honestly, even cells are doing it. I think that this is a function of life itself that is, it's intensified in a nervous system, especially a really huge nervous system like the human brain. But I think that it's really probably going to turn out to be a factor in life itself. And it's if that capacity, that factor of retrocausation or presentiment or whatever you want to call it, gives a living organism even like just a tiny edge, or enables it to be, just a little bit more successful than random chance, would predict, then that's going to be selected for in evolution, and given, however many billion years of evolution, 4 billion years of evolution, it's gonna produce creatures that have dreams about their future and have inklings of what to do next, or gut feelings that turn out to be right, and precognitive dreams about events later in their lives.
Well, so are precognitive dreams really synonymous with intuition?
No, I mean, I think intuition is just kind of the more everyday way in which precognition functions to sort of guide us. I think precognitive dreams are a way of kind of seeing it, kind of opening up the hatch on that function and really seeing it for what it is and understanding it.
Kind of wondering the purpose of not making it literal then. I mean, there's got to be a purpose to it, so obviously we've got to be able to figure it out and stuff. But having it be symbolic in so many different ways causes us to sort of go into it.
Well, this is something I talk about a lot in the book, and this is to me the most interesting feature of precognitive dream work is that dimension of symbolism. And I think there's not a purpose to symbolism. It's a symptom. And what it's a symptom of is the fact that we're freely willed creatures. And you can't have information flowing from the future into the past in a way that would ever foreclose that future that sent that information back. So we're talking here about the grandfather paradox, okay? If you had, it would be totally impossible to have a video quality precognitive dream about an event tomorrow that you would want to avoid, okay? And, most precognitive dreams are about not terrible things, but things that, maybe make us uneasy or feel awkward or they're annoying, or they're about certain situations that are not necessarily the most pleasant situations often. So those, we can't have a video quality precognitive dream about, even something like, the toilet backing up tomorrow, because I'm going to then take action to prevent the toilet from backing up. So instead, that dream is symbolic. And I think that in fact Freud was right about how we need to interpret our dreams. I mean, the free association, he was right about how dreams disguise our waking thoughts using, what he called condensation and displacement, which simply means sort of using substitutions and puns and the whole sort of language of dream work that he wrote about in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. He was absolutely right about that stuff. He was wrong about the function that those symbolic disguises serve. He thought that they were serving to hide repressed thoughts, forbidden thoughts, and that so they had to be censored, and that dream symbolism was a function of censorship. That's where Freud went wrong, I think. But the real function is to preserve the self-consistency of the universe, and to essentially prevent paradox is one way of looking at it. Information from the future cannot be literal and direct and straightforward if you here in the present are a freely willed being who's going to use that information to change what you've seen. So what we receive is a sort of symbolic, distorted, disguised version of a future experience, which then in one way or another leads us to take the actions, the freely willed actions that lead to that future outcome. And so that's why the adventure of precognitive dream work, counterintuitively, is not about looking forward, really. It's about looking back in hindsight on a dream that has turned out to be precognitive and understanding how it represented that reality that was in the future from the standpoint of the dream. But looking back on that, that's what precognitive dream work really amounts to. It amounts to kind of an archaeology. It's looking back on your past and seeing how your past has been shaped by misunderstanding messages from your future, and that when you start to see your own sort of symbolic language and the way that your future self has been communicated into the past, it's really awe-inspiring, because the brilliance of the symbolism is just genius. It's your dreams are just ingenious ways of conveying to you information that can't be told directly. It's often compared to a game of charades. Well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that game of charades. There's a reason you can't just come right out and say what's going to happen tomorrow. That's just not a possible dream to have in a universe where you are a freely willed being that's going to create that future, that needs to create that future that needs to happen in the dream. So it has to be disguised. That I really think is the reason for dream symbolism and dream distortion. In fact, oddly enough, it connects honestly to the laws that govern wormholes. I mean, this is really bringing Freud together with Einstein, in a sense, because we're really talking about symbolism as a function of a kind of curvature of cognitive space-time.
Well, let me add Barbara in here too, because when I do this kind of work, and there have been times that I have played with it seriously here, I go through the same process that you talk about. I look for the symbolism, and then I see how the experience unfolded, and then I ask myself, because to me, this is a lesson I needed to learn, so what did this teach me?
Mm-hmm.
So about me, was it
mm-hmm.
What did I learn from this experience? How did I respond? Was there a better way to go? How do I take this information, because it has now been pointed out to me that was a situation, that was a learning experience that I should take another look at and see how did I become a better person from this experience, because obviously it's important. I dreamt about it, 1 or 2 or 3 nights before. So what did I learn from this? This is something that I have to pay attention to. This was, even if it was the backing up of a sink or something like that, it was a lesson for me to pay attention to. So how do I apply this to my life and be richer for it?
Mm-hmm.
But you bring up Freud again, and I was fascinated at the fact that Freud and Jung popped up all over the place, and of course Freud wrote dream interpretation, so of course he had to be there. But you speak of one particular instance in his life where he had a dream and how it reflected on his future tremendously. You want to share that, because I think that's a profound story.
It's an incredible story, and I wrote a whole chapter of my first book, Time Loops, about it, and it just stayed with me, and the more I thought about it, the deeper levels of meaning in that story just kept coming back to me, and I had to read it, take a fresh look at it in the new book. Yeah, so okay, this is amazing. And where do you even begin with this story? Because to preface this, to remind your listeners who may not be that familiar with Freud. I mean, Freud's great. His most famous, I guess, claim about human psychology was that we're governed by basically a single archetype. If you want to compare Freud and Jung had a bunch of archetypes. Freud had a single archetype, and that was the myth of Oedipus. Okay, and to remind people what the myth of Oedipus is, the king of Thebes received a prophecy from an oracle that his infant son was going to grow up and kill him and marry his wife. okay? That is, the kid was going to marry his mother and kill his father. And so he said, well, take the boy out to the wilderness and leave him to die, okay? So, a servant takes him out to the wilderness, and of course, a shepherd comes by and rescues the boy and takes him to this other town called Corinth on the other side of the mountain. And the boy grows up and is adopted by the king of Corinth, okay? And he doesn't know he's adopted. And then when he's a young adult, he receives a prophecy from an oracle. You are going to murder your father and marry your mother. And he thinks, oh my God, that's horrible. I've got to get out of town because I don't want that to happen. So he flees Corinth, and he's at a mountain crossroads, and this man gives him trouble, and he kills this man. And of course, the man he later realizes was his real father, the king of Thebes. Anyway, he doesn't know that yet, though, and he answers a riddle of a sphinx, and then becomes the new king of Thebes and marries the dead king's wife, which turns out to be really his mother, and so on. So this was the core myth for Freud, that we all want to, if you're a boy, you want to kill your father and marry your mother, and if you're a girl, you want to kill your mother and marry your father. Now, he did not believe. People often think that he was a total skeptic about anything paranormal, and that's not true. He believed in telepathy. He believed in he had a lot of superstitions and beliefs, but he did not believe in precognitive dreams. And despite the fact that every culture in history has thought that dreams could be precognitive, and that he had patients who would bring him their precognitive dreams, he would find some way to say that their memory was distorted and no, it really meant this other thing. He would provide a kind of convoluted psychoanalytic explanation for how they were deceiving themselves in order to avoid facing the idea of precognitive dream precognition. He was a function of the Enlightenment. He was a creature of the Enlightenment. It's like I said, back then you just could not make a claim that something in the past was influenced by something in the future. Okay, well, here's the thing. In 1895, he awoke he was on vacation. He awoke from this dream about one of his patients, that he was looking into her mouth. He was actually just treating her for hysteria, but he looked into her mouth, saw these white patches on the back of her throat, and some scabs on her inside her mouth, and he could somehow see up inside her nose through her mouth. Okay, and there were some other things going on in the dream too. But and this patient, and she didn't even want to open her mouth to show him because it was like she was wearing dentures. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, he awoke from this dream, and there was just so many symbols and interesting things going on in this dream, and he free associated on them, and and he basically from this one dream formulated his dream theory, which put him on the map as a scientist. It was a huge revolution in the sciences of the mind and so on, and he became Sigmund Freud, the great Sigmund Freud, because of this dream. All right, well, fast forward 23 years after he had this dream, he developed oral cancer as a result of a lifetime of cigar smoking. And it started with white patches at the back of his mouth. He had to have a sequence of surgeries which left his mouth full of these scabs because there wasn't enough tissue to heal them over. It was very disgusting. Very crude surgeries they had to perform back in the 19-teens. And ultimately, over the course of this really awful year of his life, they had to remove his palate. Okay, they had to cut out his palate, so you could see inside his nose from inside his mouth. All right.
Wow.
Just like what happened in the dream, in the mouth of his patient, in the dream that put him on the map. 23 years earlier. And he wound up having to wear this crude kind of denture, kind of prosthetic in his mouth, and he could barely open his mouth because of that. So again, just like his patient in this dream. And in fact, in the dream, when he's looking, when he's examining his patient, he says, it's only your own fault. Okay. Well, this he never in his writings acknowledged this connection between what was happening in his body and that dream, that famous dream of his. And in fact, all but no one really knew what was happening. He didn't write about these specifics. I mean, we had to read his biography to find out about this. He didn't tell people exactly. And he lived actually another 15 years after this horrible surgery. He could barely talk. But he wrote some of his best books after that. But he was really the biggest and worst upheaval in his life. And so what, but this was discovered, that the similarity between his dream and what happened in his mouth 23 years later was sort of identified and discussed by another psychoanalyst and surgeon back in the 1980s, I think, many years after Freud was gone, sort of made this connection. But it's really stunning when you look at the dream and then look at his own, what happened in his life. It's clearly a precognitive dream, and in fact, there's a lot of other evidence that he was a precog, sort of anticipating things in his writing and in his in other aspects of his life. But here's a guy who basically founded his career on telling the world what dreams were, but denying the existence of prophecy, and fulfilling that prophecy, fulfilling an actual prophecy in the process of evading the whole issue of prophecy. So just like Oedipus, right? So, and the funny thing is that Freudian writers love to go back and reinterpret Freud using his own theories. That's just that's the game. If you're a psychoanalyst, is you so you go back and do a clever rereading of Freud through the lens of Freud's Oedipus complex. But literally, it's true that he was essentially living out the myth of Oedipus without knowing it. He was evading prophecy, and in the process, fulfilling it. So I just think it's amazing. It's an amazing story. It was a long answer to your question, but yeah, he's it's an incredible case. And there are a lot of cases like that, dreams that span decades of a person's life.
It really is amazing, and a lot of times people will dream of something and they'll go online and they'll look for an explanation of the symbolism of whatever it is, and I tell people to create their own symbolic dictionary, because if my goodness, wasn't in a dream, but it was in an altered state. I can remember saying to some lady, I'm seeing you with antique buttons, and I said, I might want to check out, see if it's something you might want to collect, if it's something that might have relevance to your life. And 4 or 5 months later, she got back to me and she said, I have no idea where antique buttons came in. And when we were talking, and she said, I've looked at antique buttons, they don't turn me on at all. And I looked at her and I realized, I said, is there maybe an older person that is pushing your buttons and giving you all sorts of anxiety? And she said, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
And it was so it was, I got a symbol. The symbol I interpreted from my standpoint, which was inappropriate. Had I only said to her, antique buttons are relevant here, she might have figured it out a lot faster than I did. But so if
Right.
You're going to have a dictionary for what things are symbolic of, create your own, because all you're going to get is someone else's interpretation of a symbol that may not apply to you.
Exactly. And this is why I think I have sort of a love-hate relationship with Carl Jung, which is probably just, you can detect in the book. On the one hand, he was, very important figure in sort of leading us to being able to talk about these kinds of experiences without ridicule. He sort of gave people permission to talk about paranormal phenomena in a way that no one else had, in the 20th century. So he was, really important figure for that reason. By the same token, he imposed a kind of reductive theory of his own that has ultimately, while it inspired a lot of people, it's ultimately, I think, impeded people from understanding these phenomena. And I'm referring to his theory of synchronicity. I mean, it's a great word, it's a great label to say, wow, that was a really cool synchronicity or whatever. But he was not able to provide, he called it a principle, but it's not really. I mean, even in his writing, it's not really a principle, and it's not a theory or an explanation. It's just sort of a label. I think, I think understanding that we're just talking about a word, and we can actually theorize these phenomena now, is, I think, really important. And the idea of just, like a list of archetypes, that you can sort of plug your dream symbols into these kind of pre-existing cultural codes, I think really kind of limits impedes understanding, because, like you said, you have to, the meaning of lived experience is from your own personal experience. Your dream symbols are all taken from your own life experience. Now, if you happen to immerse yourself in mythology and or you're reading Carl Jung every day, then a lot of those symbols in your dreams are going to be archetypes, because that's part of your lived experience. Not because those archetypes are hovering out in space somewhere or in some platonic realm. It's just because that's your experience. And in the same way, people in Freudian, hardcore Freudian people and people with Freudian analysts, they wind up having dreams about Oedipus and Oedipal situations. They'll bring their doctor, dreams that seem to confirm, Freud's theories. It's a well-known phenomenon in psychotherapy that, like, people dream in an idiom that matches the theoretical orientation of the therapist. But yeah, your symbols come from your life experience.
I found that fascinating. That they go to people whose interpretations, correspond to a certain, people who in therapy will have experiences that sort of go along with the background of the therapist they're working with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well known. It's a well-known phenomenon. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So pick your therapist, well before you decide to go in to be analyzed and taken apart and put back together again.
Yeah. And
actually, if you, I was just going to say, if you keep a dream journal, you can be your own therapist very easily. And especially with free association. I mean, when you're free associating, after a while, you'll understand what modality you're coming from.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I love synchronicity, though. I just think, I really like those. I think when things happen synchronistically, I think that there is a meaning there. And
I don't disagree with that. I totally agree. Although I think the meaning is about your life is simply where I dispute some readings of the Jungian theory. Some people they'll use the term synchronicity, and kind of what they mean is that some higher some higher power or higher intelligence or other intelligence, is pulling their strings or is orchestrating things in their life. And I'm simply trying to get people to see, no, this is your long self orchestrating this. This is you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's simply, that's my dispute. And actually, to be fair, Jung, I mean, half the time that's what Jung is saying about synchronicity, but then in like the next paragraph, he'll sort of imply something different. So it's very hard to pin him down about what he means.
Yeah, I think when things happen and they feel synchronistic, it's sort of like there is meaning here for you, and
Mm-hmm.
and I would go along with you. I don't think it's because God or the angels or spirit guides or whatever are manipulating anything. I think that there's a reason and a purpose for your life at this point in time. Pay attention.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But lots of people like to think that there is that higher power, and even though they don't realize that they are that higher power, it's easier to say, well, God meant this to be. Well, no, not necessarily, but blame it on whoever you like. There is a synchronicity there, and pay attention to what's going on.
Right.
You used another term that I thought, two terms, your time gimmicks and your calendrical resonance, both of which I thought were fascinating, and they do apply in precog stuff. So if you want to go in and explain those, I think that would be great.
Yeah, let's take the last one first. It's calendrical resonance. This is something that I discovered kind of early on in my own adventure of precognitive dreamwork. I had a few examples of pretty powerful dreams that connected very amazingly to something that happened in one case exactly a year later, a year to the day, and in another case exactly 18 years later.
Wow.
And so this was on my radar, but I didn't necessarily think this was a huge, I didn't know how important this was going to turn out to be. But then in working with one of the real sort of super precogs who appears in the new book, we sort of collaborated over some of her dreams. And she had lots of examples of this. And that got me to then look at, take a fresh look at my own dream journals. Fortunately, I had been keeping a dream journal for 2.5 decades, basically. I had been recording my dreams since I had been in graduate school, basically, back in the early 90s. And I had decades of electronic dream journals, in Word files and stuff, with no thought about precognition. I mean, this is before I ever got interested or even knew about dream precognition. But anyway, so I was able to go back through my dream records and find other examples of this, very striking examples. And then I started noticing this even in the literature and in other people's dreams that they'd share with me, and so on. And I realized, oh, this is huge. There is some, and I do some speculation, sort of informed speculation about how this may work cognitively. There's a lot of reason to think that we do possess kind of a calendrical map in our heads, that we do unconsciously kind of know what day it is, even if we don't consciously know what day it is, and that the dates of the year, or at least like times of the year, fine-grained sort of times of the year, resonate with each other through our biographies. So that is to say, just the same way, you suddenly feel sad on a certain, you're like, gosh, I feel really sad today. And then you look at the calendar and realize, oh, it's the 5th anniversary of when your mother passed away or something like that. That's a common experience in our folklore of emotion, Well, I think the same thing's working forward in time as well, that certain dates of the year, if something important is going to happen to you on this date in, 5 years, you may well have a dream tonight about that, that is in fact about that event 5 years from now. And when you keep a dream journal over the span of more than a year, you can start to see this. And it's just incredible. I mean, it's really prevalent. Like any sort of really standout emotional experience, you are liable to have precognized in a dream a year or multiple years beforehand. For instance, the births of both of my daughters. I went back and sure enough, there were very specific details about both of the births, and in both cases, exactly a year to the day beforehand, I had a dream about those specific details. And it's there are a lot of examples of this in the new book. So it's a feature that deserves a name, and I call it Calendrical Resonance. That is to say, the way that dates in the calendar resonate with each other in our biographies. So it's one of the big things to look for in your precognitive dream work. And if you're fortunate enough, it's never too late to start keeping a dream journal. If you're fortunate enough to already have a dream journal, it really pays to go back through your dream journal and look for these things, because it's mind blowing. I mean, it's one thing to have a precognitive dream that's about an event the next day or the next couple days. That's amazingly cool, but to realize that somehow an event today was already in my head 18 years ago. That is mind blowing, and that really that'll really do a number on your beliefs about who you are. So it's a very powerful experience to experience this. The other one you mentioned, time gimmicks. I've found that dreams that, now I think that most dreams, I suspect that maybe all dreams contain precognitive material. I can't prove that. I'll never be able to prove that. But I think it's probably a basic function of dreaming. But dreams that you realize precognitive, and especially dreams that you realize were precognitive right when the event is happening, right when the precognized event is happening, those dreams often contain some kind of symbol or motif or some element that signals that you were going back to the dream in hindsight. And often it'll be a symbol having to do with anachronism of one kind, or time travel, or something like that. In my case, I'm a science fiction fan from my whole life, and so motifs from science fiction TV series and movies, Doctor Who or the Terminator or whatever time travel, Star Trek episodes, about time travel. Those things are active dream symbols for me in dreams that actually turned out to be precognitive, and I realized it at the time that the event was happening. So this is a really cool thing to look for too, because that too is mind blowing in its own way, because what you're seeing in a time gimmick is actually a representation of you now in the present looking back at the dream, and you've written it in a dream that happened a few days ago or a year ago or multiple years ago. That it's like it gives you vertigo to kind of see this reflection of your current consciousness in the record of an old dream. It's bizarre, just wow, it'll it'll cause an altered state to have this realization.
No, I can imagine, and it seems that time becomes a different sort of concept when you're realizing that in the past you've gotten hits of something that has happened, 20 years later or whatever, and if you happen to have a dream journal, that's fabulous, because it gives you an idea that the time is more fluid than you really had thought, and if you can. But see, the fascinating thing is, okay, so you saw something long ago repeated, especially with the time of your children's birth. So if you have more children, will that still apply to that? Or, do you ever wonder, are there more on the way? Or was it just those? You have two, right? Two?
Yeah, two. No current plans to have more, but it's those are just examples. Those are just examples. Those were, those are big events in the landscape of my life. Our life is kind of a landscape that's mostly level and has a few peaks and valleys and a few, really high peaks. Those high peaks are the ones that are the really powerful moments, and those are the ones that I think are visible from a long way off. And those are the kinds of things that I think that are likely to surface in a precognitive dream a year, multiple years beforehand. Now, that is not to say that it's only calendrical resonance that determines when you may have a dream about a future event. There are a number of factors that I think play into sort of precipitating a dream about something in the future, and the date of the calendar is just one thing that could sort of spark a dream about a future event. Another factor, and it's probably even more important, I don't know, I suspect it could be as important or even more important than calendrical dates, is what I call thematic resonance. And that's where just an experience that is similar to a future experience in some way will then precipitate a dream that night that is about that future experience. I can give you one example of this. It's not in the book, but this was about 2 years ago. I had been staying up late thinking about, I was writing something about the David Lynch movie Eraserhead, okay? And it's not important to know what that movie if you haven't seen it, but the point is I was writing and reading about this. It was kind of preoccupying me. Anyway, I was then laying in bed and kind of meditating in bed, as I often do, and I had a flash vision. Okay, and this often occurs in meditation, and these are very often precognitive, so I write them down whenever I can. Anyway, the flash vision was of a robot head. Okay, and it was a robot, and it was like a dome head of a robot with like a few antennas sticking off and a single eye right in the middle of it. And it was just, a very striking, very brief flash. But I drew it in my notebook. And I wrote robot head next to it. And I didn't make any connection to what I had been thinking about that night, which was the movie Eraserhead. But anyway, so fast forward it was about a week and a half, okay? I was on vacation with my family, visiting my mom in Colorado, okay? And I sort of spontaneously decided to get out an old box in my mom's basement that contained my Legos from when I was a kid, because I thought, well, my daughter was sort of just old enough maybe to start playing with Legos. I thought, well, she might like these. And so I went down and got this box, brought it up to the living room, and sort of dumped out this big box of Legos on the floor. And what should I find? In the bottom of this box of Legos was a little robot eraser from it was probably circa 1979 or something. And I vaguely remembered it. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that. It was a little blue robot eraser, and it had this little domed head with these three little antennas sticking off it and a single eye right in the middle. I mean, it was almost exactly what I had seen in my vision a few weeks, or a week and a half or 2 weeks earlier. And I just immediately recognized, ran and got my dream journal, and I set it right next to it, and it was like, oh my God, it's just uncanny. Like I love it when that happens. It was so obvious and literal. And I didn't even think about the connection, though, that I had actually been thinking about Eraserhead that evening.
Yeah.
So you see, there was a thematic, there was a reason I had that flash vision that night about this discovery that was ahead in my future. It's not like, and here's where, people in the Jungian vein may say, well, that was a synchronicity. Well, no, I don't think it was a synchronicity. It was a precognitive vision. It could have just as easily been a dream about an event in my future. But it was precipitated. There was a reason I had it then, which is that I had just been thinking about Eraserhead, and that sparked an association, to something that was coming down the pike in my future, which was an eraser with a distinctive head. And so what do I, have a vision of, a robot head that turns out to be an eraser robot head, and it's those associative connections that go across time, that run across time. Associative links are really the kind of sinews in the unconscious, and I think that they extend across our lives, past, future, and that's why that free association step of precognitive dreamwork is so important, because it's the associative links, those associative links that they're often the connection between a dream and a future experience. But in any case, that yeah.
Well, you also, one of the cool things too, you mentioned that you can get these inspirations, these visions, these insights in other states of consciousness, and you mentioned lucid dreams, out-of-body experiences, trance, sleep paralysis, and meditation. So there are other places where you can get this kind of information, and in almost all of them, you're going into alpha. In many of these states here that I'm familiar with, so that you're in a state of openness, I guess is the best word to use with it. Sort of
receptivity is what I. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Same thing. You're conscious. In my terms, I would explain it as the ego goes away and you have an open flow of information from another level of yourself to speak to yourself.
Yeah. No, exactly. I totally agree. I think that I think people draw too many. They have too many names for different states of consciousness, and I really have come to suspect that they aren't that different. They're all kind of versions of the same thing, and it's this. To me, it's precognition. I there may be other stuff going on, and a lot of people, most people will argue that there's other things going on. People will say that, well, we're also, being telepathic, and we're also, remote viewing and all that stuff. I like to be kind of reductive about it and see how much I can explain through the precognitive model, and I'm kind of dumbfounded at how much really fits this model. But I absolutely think you're right that whatever you want to, you can call it trance, you can call it, you can, and then we have these various dream states, and you can call it meditation, whatever. I think that they're all opening us up to the same thing. And yeah, it is kind of openness, receptivity, whatever. But in any of these states, you're liable to get information from your future. And like I said, some people are more prone, some people are better at it than others. I mean, some of us slip into those states very readily. I say us. Some people, I don't. I mean, I wish that I were the kind of person who, had visions very readily in waking life, or, heard voices that, might give me advice or whatever. I'm not that person. I know a lot of people who are. I know a lot of psychics who are just very facile at doing that. And it's like, wow, that's so cool. I'd love to be able to do that. I do have long experience with Zen meditation, and so that will take me to a state where I occasionally have those kinds of visions. And that practice has also enabled me to sort of utilize hypnagogic states a little bit. But yeah, I think some people are more natural. But yeah, I think it's all the same thing, really.
Yeah. See, this is where I call it. I go to the zone, because I've done this for decades. And it is a state of receptivity. It is probably a state of alpha. And so, that's easier for me than not going to the bathroom when I wake up and writing down dreams. But I, it's different strokes for different folks, for sure.
Sure.
And but I think the big thing is this kind of state is very different from prayer and stuff like that, because you're listening, you're not speaking.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
There's a form of, they call it empty-headed meditation, which is easy for anybody to do, and it's a matter of emptying your mind you start out with like 5 minutes, and if stuff drifts in, you just kick it out and say thank you, and you go back to emptiness. And the better you get at it, you stretch it theoretically to about 20 minutes, where you can sit with an empty head and allow things to flow through. And some
that's
people,
what I mean by Zen.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by that's what I'm doing in Zen. Yeah.
Exactly. So for people that have trouble remembering their dreams, there are other ways of getting to this frame of mind, and I don't want to call it energy, because that just that's too metaphysical. I would say that it gets to the spot inside of you where you're not thinking, you're listening, and if you can get to that place, then you will get impressions, and when you get impressions, write them down, because those are valid impressions of something coming from another level of you inside. And quite often, it can be profoundly insightful, and and if you write down your impressions in that kind of experience, it does become like a dream journal. You can do the free association with the symbols that you get, and the whole thing, and see if it doesn't work the same way. I think the fact that everybody has a different way of getting to that spot within them, and some people are very good at remembering their dreams. Some people can write volumes of their dreams. I get tidbits here and there, and I look at them, and it's you got to give me something better to work with. I mean, it's whenever I read a book, I try to put myself through the exercises and stuff, that if there are exercises in them, and I have found that trying to remember my dreams has been a lot more difficult than I remembered. Yet I can go into that zone and get impressions in a heartbeat. So realizing that there is that similarity between the two modalities of getting into that place where these images can come through to you, should be, I think, encouraging to some people who, like me, I go right from whatever that zone is into let me make this dream better, and reprogram it in a different way, and then I know I'm taking charge of whatever's going on in my head. So that's not allowing a flow. That's me determining what I want to hear. So and it's hard to call that while you're in the middle of it because you're having such a good time that you don't want to say, okay, let me just listen.
Yeah. This is why I'm not so interested in lucid dreams, actually. I mean, I enjoy lucid dreams, but when I'm in a lucid dream, I really don't try to control anything because I just want to see what it's going to show me, because I'm interested in, I want to be able to write it down later and see what the message is because I'm more interested in that than in like using it as a playground to indulge my whims or whatever. But yeah, what you're saying is absolutely true. And if it's like you said, different strokes for different folks. And if you're someone who is able to access that zone in waking life in whatever way, use it. And another big one is creativity, art. Doing whatever artistic, whatever medium you work in. Whether you write poetry or paint pictures or photography or anything, that too is another it's a zone. It becomes a kind of trance state where you are really channeling from your future. And in fact, I think precognition is really what creativity is. That's kind of the special sauce of creativity, as far as I'm concerned. That we are getting ideas for our future, and that's actually the research that I'm working on now. Hopefully for a future book, if I can ever get time to write it. On when you start to delve into the biographies of artists and writers, it is amazing. I mean, it's just like studying dreams. I mean, artworks and novels and stories and paintings are very often precognitive of things that then subsequently happen in the person's life, in an artist's life. So I just think it's a really rich theme for studying this phenomenon, and for people who, they may not be great at recalling your dreams, but if you do an art of some kind, treat that the same way as you would treat dreams.
That's how I did the deck of cards I did. I got all the symbols through dreams and painted them, and actually they got published. It's called the Cosmic Deck of Initiation. I totally, I hammer at people constantly, you have to have some sort of creativity in your life in order to fuel the forward motion of your life. That's where the energy comes from. It's from a creative process, and it can be any kind of creativity, and the spectrum is phenomenal.
Right.
Or even doing
just say though. Yeah. One of the values of dream work, besides just the precognitive dimension, is just awakening to the fact that even when you're not trying to be creative, at night your brain is incredibly creative. I mean, just the amazing brilliance of the symbolism, and when you start to awaken to that, it really kind of empowers you to be creative in waking life, in your art or whatever. I think that's one of the real values of any kind of dream work, honestly. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I think that's a really important thing to say.
Because when you are being creative, no matter how you're doing it, there is an energy that you click into that energizes you. And people who take joy in their creativity, can go out without eating and without sleeping for long periods of time because they're just so into it that they become a part of it. And when you become a part of it, it just takes over, and it's exciting as heck. And so when people say they've got a block or of some sort, I always stress, get into some form of creativity that you enjoy, and let it break through this block that you've got, because it does. the minute you get into that creative energy, there's a flow that happens that is quite remarkable. And on top of the creativity being exciting, you do get symbols. You do get things do flow through your head. I used to do needlepoint constantly, and it was boring work. But the more bored my intellect became, the more creative my mind became, and the wonderful things came, ideas for poetry or ideas for writing, or it was just amazing that by boring my mind, I allowed, excuse me, I'm going to get metaphysical, my spirit to come through and manifest stuff in my reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and I love the fact that you've got, you bring up the fact that there are so many different ways of opening yourself up to the precognitive stuff, so that you don't have to just do, the dream journal is a fabulous idea and it works beautifully. But, it doesn't have to be just dreams. It can be symbols and things that you get that are out of place within reality, and yet there it is. And I imagine most people have from time to time said something that just didn't go along with what was happening, but it was brilliant, or you don't know where it came from, but write it down. I want to remember it. And that's, again, a part of precognition. Something just came through that needed to be brought to recognition, and there it is.
Right. Absolutely.
So I want you to talk just for a little bit about your blog, because your blog is fascinating, and I spent some time on it today. And tell people about Nightshirt.
Yeah, okay, so my blog is thenightshirt.com. It's all one word, the nightshirt, as in what people used to wear to bed.
Yes.
I started the blog. It's funny, I came up with the name of the blog. I think I started it back in, a long time ago now, 15 years ago maybe. And I didn't even really have an idea for what exactly to write about, but somehow the name, as the name actually came from an old dream of mine, and the sort of tagline of I forget what it is. It's sightings, portents, forebodings, and suspicions. And I had a vague idea that I wanted to write about dreams, but I didn't even really know about precognitive dreams at that point. But somehow I wound up having a couple of UFO sightings a couple of years after that. I'd never actually had a sighting of anything, and I wound up writing about UFOs, and then that sort of led into writing about parapsychology, and so it really the dream, that inspiration to start a blog was precognitive of what the blog ultimately became. But yeah, the blog has sort of been my sketch pad essentially for the books that I've written, and so I write a lot about precognition in dreams. I write a lot about precognition in the arts and in literature, and some of those articles will be expanded into the next book I write on precognition and creativity. Occasionally I'll write about other paranormal phenomena like UFOs and stuff. And I write a lot of science fiction as well. But so I invite people to visit the Nightshirt and check it out. And if you like what you see, then there's more of that in my books.
Well, I got to tell you, I had a lovely time going through it, and I am sorry, but we are out of time here. So I want to thank you so much, and I highly recommend people pick up your book. It's Precognitive Dreamwork and the Long Self, and we've had Eric Wargo on with us tonight. I want to thank everybody so much. It's been a heck of an exciting trip for me, and I hope for you too. And it's going to be up on YouTube and on Rumble tomorrow, and of course it's going to be in the archives as well. So please Join us tomorrow. Mark has a great show. And if you like what you see on the YouTube and the Rumble account, please subscribe. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.